Hello again, amazing teachers, and welcome to Module 3. In this module, we're going to talk all about choosing center activities. So this is where the rubber really starts meeting the road, because this is where it gets really important. You're deciding what you're actually going to put in those centers for your kiddos to use. So first of all, for your centers to be successful, they must be carefully planned. You simply cannot walk into your classroom on Monday and just pull some stuff from a shelf and throw it into a basket and call it centers. You should spend as much, if not more time, carefully planning the activities that you're putting in centers as you spend planning your whole group activities. Now, when you're choosing your center activities, there are 3 things that I really want you to keep in mind. Number 1, you're going to hear me say this over and over. You have to keep those state standards in mind. That's where it starts. That's where everything in your classroom starts, is with those state standards. So you have to consider what standards it is that you're trying to teach and that you want your kiddos to practice. And then very closely after that is the needs of your students. We have to consider what your students need whenever we're considering what kind of activities to put in your centers. And then finally, you have to consider the materials that you have available. So we're going to talk about each one of these a little bit more. And again, let's go back to the beginning. We always start with the standards. So think about when you're deciding what center activities to do, what have you recently taught that you want your students to practice? What are you learning right now in class that you want them to have extra practice with? Or what skills do they need ongoing practice with, such as sight words or math facts? They might need ongoing practice with some of those skills. And then what previously taught skills do your students need to review? Maybe it's been a while, you want to go back and touch on it because another unit is coming up where that's going to be important. So really think about those 3 aspects whenever you're choosing your center activities. And then once you know the standards that you want to address, then we're going to move on to considering the needs of your students and what kind of practice would be the most effective for them. So let's look at a few examples of that. Let's say that your students are struggling with fluency. You have some different options with how to give them practice with their reading fluency. You might want to include some fluency practice as an option in an exploration center, like your reading center. So you could have fluency passages, you could have reader's theater scripts, you could have sight word sentences, you could put lots of different options. Just stock that reading center with lots of things that will allow them to practice their fluency. You can put familiar text in there that they can read over and over and over again, so that they're practicing that fluency. That's one option. You could also set up a completely different center that's a skill center solely focused on fluency with reading. And so you might have some of those same things included that you might add to your reading center. The reader's theater scripts, the sight word sentences, fluency passages. But the difference is the whole center is focused just on the skill of fluency. That's what distinguishes it from an exploration center like the reading center. It would just be the fluency center. You might even have one story that you've turned into a reader's theater script at 4 different levels. And depending on the reading level of your students, they can get the one that most closely matches their reading ability, and they can practice that one. So that's just some different ways that you could practice fluency if your students are struggling with that, if that's one of the standards that you need to address when you're planning your center activities. Now let's go to a different end of the spectrum and talk about a social skill, because you can absolutely target those in your centers as well. So if your students are struggling to cooperate with each other, because that never happens, right? They all get along all the time. If they're struggling with cooperating with each other, then you might want to select some materials for your exploration centers that are going to foster creative play. So again, you're just kind of trying to direct them towards that cooperation when they're in their exploration centers, but it's still a choice. So you might add new props to the dramatic play center that kind of lend themselves to students working together. Like maybe you turn it into a restaurant where they're having to work together to take orders and serve food and cook food, that kind of thing. You also could reduce the amount of materials that you have in some of your centers so that they're having to share with each other and they're having to problem solve how they are going to do that when there's only one set of blocks instead of 3. So that's one way that you can focus on cooperation in an exploration center. In a skill center, you might make it to where all the activities that they can engage in are partner games or small group games, so that they're having to cooperate and work together to be able to play that game. They don't get to do it by themselves. They don't get to just have their way. They have to work together to play that math game or to play that reading game or to play that vocabulary game. So that's just an example of how you can focus on those social skills by carefully choosing activities that you put in your centers. Now, once you've considered the state standards and once you've considered the needs of your students, the last thing, but still important to consider, is the materials that you have available. Now, I get it. In a charter school, materials are not just free flowing, right? Sometimes we struggle to find what we need to give our students the activities that we want them to have. So this is where I challenge you to get creative and to think outside of the box. Maybe you can borrow from somebody else who has the materials that you need. Maybe you can do an Amazon wish list and share it on Facebook so that people who love you and support you can help you get the materials that you need without you having to spend your entire paycheck to get them. Maybe you can go to Dollar Tree. Sometimes I would go and just walk the aisles and look for things that I could use in ways maybe not for their original purpose in learning centers that would be engaging and fun for my students and help me accomplish the goals that I had for them. There are some real treasures of the Dollar Tree if you take some time just to go look and sit and be creative while you're in those aisles. You could also go to the Wellman Project. It's out in Fort Worth, and they have materials that are free for anyone who teaches in an ISD or a charter school. All you have to have is your ID. So if you want more information about the Wellman Project, send me an email and I'll get it to you. If it's something, on that you would print out and laminate, some kind of a learning activity of that nature, is it something I could make for you? I'm always happy to make activities for you guys if it's something that I'm able to do. So if you're not sure, before you pay money on TPT, email me and say, hey, Miss A, can you make me a math game for fractions? I probably can. Hey, Miss A, can you make me a partner game for sight words? Yeah, I probably can. And then you don't have to spend money on it, and we can make it available to everyone in the district. So just think outside of the box, right? There's so many ways that you can get materials. Garage sales are fantastic. Just put a plea out on Facebook. Hey, I need this for my science center. Do you have anything you could donate? You'll be surprised at what comes up. So even though you do have to consider the materials that you have available, don't let yourself be limited by that. But make sure you're planning far enough ahead for your learning centers that you have time to put out those requests, or to go make your wish list, or to go shopping at different places, or to ask me to make it for you, because I can't do that instantaneously, right? So make sure you're planning far enough in advance that you have time to gather those materials so that you don't have to let go of a really fantastic activity just because you were planning it at the last minute and you don't have what you need to do it.